everyone. I'm Amy Kelly. We are so glad you're joining us tonight for this special legal webinar. I think it's going to be really interesting, and we've had a lot of interest in it, so glad you can all be here. I'm just going to introduce Dr. Wolf, and then she'll introduce our special guest, and we'll go from there. So Dr. Naomi Wolf is the CEO and co-founder of Daily Clout. She's a best-selling author, journalist, and professor. She graduated from Yale and received her doctorate from Oxford University and was also a Rhodes Scholar. She has many bestsellers, as probably many of you know. They've been translated worldwide, and she's also been published in newspapers throughout the U.S. as well as globally. So welcome, Naomi.
Thank you so much, Amy, the amazing Amy Kelly, and welcome everyone. That sound is my new puppy. You'll have to forgive him. I'm smiling so much because this is my absolute favorite thing to do, to welcome James Ostrowski, who is such a favorite with all of our community and with our new friends who are joining in. He has made a mission of empowering viewers, ordinary people, no one's ordinary, with explaining the law and explaining how people can use the law. James Ostrowski is a trial and appellate lawyer and author from Buffalo, New York. He graduated from St. Joseph's Collegiate Institute in 1975 and obtained a degree in philosophy from the State University of New York at Buffalo in 1980. He graduated from Brooklyn Law School in 1983. The son of a judge, he has practiced trial and appellate law for more than 35 years and has handled many high-profile cases. He currently practices law in Buffalo, New York, and is the author of Progressivism, a primer on the idea destroying America. And I will take that squeaky toy away from the puppy, but I just want to welcome with huge enthusiasm Mr. Ostrowski, who will be explaining to us what so many people need to know, including myself and my husband, which is what do we do about the CDC's decision to inject children with mRNA vaccines. Over to you, Mr. Ostrowski. I will be right back.
Thank you, Naomi, and it's a pleasure to be with you on this important topic. I'm going to be relatively short, which is rare for me, because frankly, I think there's more questions than answers in this whole area of law, but just try to go through it very quickly so people can get a rough idea how we can go forward and fight these evil mandates. So everybody knows the CDC, some committee that hardly anybody ever heard of, put on COVID-19 vaccines for younger people, children basically, on their recommended list. And so there's been a lot of confusion of what exactly does that mean, and some fact-checking issues there where people allegedly said this is a mandate or is it a mandate. We'll try to clear that up. So long story short, I do not believe that the CDC's action in and of itself is a mandate.
There's a little bit of interference with the audio. Can you move closer to your microphone? Thank you.
Certainly. Is that better?
Much better, thank you.
Okay. So I don't believe the CDC's action, as insidious as it is, directly makes it a mandate on, say, New York State, where I am. I'm going to use New York as a model, or any of the other states. So, and I did look at the statute of New York and the regulations. The committee, this ACIP committee, ACIP, it is mentioned troublesomely mentioned in the New York State Health Department regulations, but not in a way that makes this recent action mandatory. They do list the classic vaccines that have been mandated forever, rubella and so on. In my view, this would take either a legislative change in the New York State legislature or whatever state we're talking about, or like they've tried to do during the lockdown, invoke emergency powers. So and have the health department sort of issue an emergency regulation. So there's two different pathways there. We'll talk about it as we go on. So basically, what happens if they do that? So there's a couple of different options. One would be, let's say New York State legislature adds COVID-19 vaccines to their statute. Now that's going to, again, unless they pull an emergency deal, and they've done this.
Yes. There's still some interference. Yeah.
Sure.
Thank you.
Is that better?
Much better. Don't move away from that.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So if the New York State legislature passes legislation, first of all, we should have some notice of it, unless they pull an emergency thing. I think that's going to be a little harder to do because the state has rescinded its general declaration of emergency. So we'll have some time to lobby the legislature for whatever that's going to be worth, because we know what their act has been in the past. They've been very pro-lockdown. So that would give rise to a lawsuit against the state, and that lawsuit could be filed in state court, in federal court, and we probably want a multiplicity of lawsuits, different lawyers. We do have to work as a team, but it's a few different lawsuits creates a little bit of creativity because every lawyer looks at things differently, and expert witnesses, we tend to catch things that the other lawyer misses. So a federal court lawsuit could be filed in federal court, and not to get too technical with the law, but you can file, there's federal law, which is basically our Constitution. And there's state law. The state law includes the New York State Constitution. And then there's statutory law and regulations that have to be followed. So I know it's confusing, but there's two tracks. You can file in state court and you can file in federal court, making it even more complicated. In state court, you can raise federal issues along with the state issues. And in federal court, you can raise state issues along with the federal. The problem is in federal court, the judges don't really like to get into state issues, and any excuse they have to not rule, they will take. So what I'm going to suggest is if this worst case scenario happens, there'd be several lawsuits in state court and in federal court. And we'll go through some of the legal theories that people would raise either pro se, and I am drafting a template which people could use as a guide if they want to go pro se, or if they have a local lawyer and he wants to get sort of an early start on it, that will be available on your website, obviously.
So I'm just going to interrupt you there, if I may, Mr. Ostrowski. So just for people who were not here at the last couple of Mr. Ostrowski's presentations, the great public service, so generous that Mr. Ostrowski does, and it sounds like he's going to do it again, is to create these templates that you can use to save you thousands of dollars, basically, if you decide to bring a lawsuit. You can bring it to a lawyer, and it just lets you hit the ground running, basically. It allows you to do it much more affordably. Is that an accurate way to put it, Mr. Ostrowski?
Absolutely. Whether you're pro se or go to a lawyer, the template will help. It'll give the lawyer a head start. There's really not that many. Sorry to interrupt.
Pro se means you do it yourself?
Yes, for using jargon.
Thank you.
Meaning you're going to court without an attorney.
Okay, which is wonderful. I mean, a lot of people here are going to be very interested in that. So please go ahead, and I understand you've got an outline and presentation to share with us as well.
So basically, a lot of the public tends to think that, there's such a thing as the law, and people like me, we just have to look it up. Unfortunately, that's not quite true. There's a lot of murkiness here, but let me give you the general arguments that you would make. You would certainly raise a First Amendment issue if there's no exemption. And that's a well-known, legal principle that's fairly strong in the law, yes.
Sorry to jump in again. You mean, for people, again, who are new to this discussion, you try to get, say, your kid, let's always focus, if you don't mind, on kids are in school, they're terrified, they want to protect their children from this injection.
Yes.
So first, you would advise them to try to get a religious or medical exemption, and if they don't succeed in that, then they go to the stage you're talking about?
Yes, they would want to sort of exhaust their administrative remedies by seeking a religious exemption. Now, when I looked at the regulation today, it's quite clear that there's a medical exemption if the vaccine would be detrimental. So they could try that route. Of course, we know where the medical profession has been sort of locked up by Big Pharma and so on. It's going to be difficult to do that. But then I don't see a religious exemption in the law. I could be mistaken, but I didn't see it. But there should be an exemption under the Constitution, so that would be something that you would want to apply for. So that would be one cause of action. I'm listing all the different theories. I like to think that the Fourth Amendment protects our bodily integrity, and I have used that argument in the mask lawsuit, where, by the way, we're still waiting for a decision. I'm not criticizing the judge. We did, I think, encourage Governor Hochul to end the mask mandate, but that lawsuit's still going on, and we raised that Fourth Amendment issue for the mask issue, and I don't see why we can't raise it when somebody's sort of coercing you to put something into your body. I think that's a Fourth Amendment argument. The Fifth Amendment has a due process clause, and there's 1,700 books in the library trying to explain what due process means. But it's something that you want to put in there and let the judge determine whether you have a valid cause of action.
Jumping in again for lay people, just all of us who are not lawyers. A due process clause means if you inject my child, I'm not being given due process protections that the Constitution affords me. Is that the basic idea?
Yeah.
Why would a due process clause help there?
Well, here's the problem, frankly. Not to get too technical, but Clarence Thomas's position in the Dobbs case, which I read today, he's not he thinks due process means process. There has been a line of thought going back 100 years that there's a substantive element. In other words, there's certain things the government cannot do to you that are fundamentally unfair or outrageous in terms of civilized life. Mm-hmm. That whole substantive due process line of argument is a little shakier now than it used to be, but I do think that there should be a fundamental fairness or an outrageous government conduct element of substantive due process. We'll have to convince Justice Thomas, who I often agree with on other issues, to maybe modify his view on that. So I also think that the Ninth Amendment, which is sort of one of those things that judges don't talk about very often, it was brought up in Griswold, the contraceptive case, and many of us, including Professor Randy Barnett, I think he wrote the book, The Forgotten Ninth Amendment, believe that the Ninth Amendment kind of incorporates the natural rights concept of the Declaration. And so there is a reservoir of rights that don't necessarily have to be specified. I interject the Ninth Amendment into any pleading of this nature. I did in the mask case, and I would if I was handling a vaccine mandate case.
And sorry, I don't mean to keep interrupting. I just want to make sure that every single person can follow this incredibly brilliant presentation. The contraceptive case that you mentioned, Griswold, was a right to privacy. And so would that be the same argument that a child has a right to privacy, a family has a right to privacy in how they let their child's medical care be handled? Would that be your argument there?
Parental rights. If in other words, in our view, in the sort of libertarian Ninth Amendment view, if the government isn't given any particular responsibility over something, it remains with the people, and that's the Ninth and 10th Amendments that sort of relate to that concept. And now there's also the guarantee of Republican government clause, which is, they always say, what does that mean? Well, I think what it means is if the regulators pass this, the health commissioner, unelected, they've usurped the right of the people to elect a legislature to pass laws, and therefore it's a violation of the Republican government clause. Again, we put this into the anti-mask lawsuit, and I would put it into the vaccine lawsuit. So going from federal causes of action to the state causes of action, every state has its own constitution, and I talked to my good friend Todd Aldinger, who's litigated several of these lockdown cases, and he made that separation of powers argument. It wasn't ultimately successful, but that was with the mandate on medical personnel, and this is a somewhat different issue for reasons I think we'll get into as we go on today. But again, if this is going to be passed, it should be passed by the legislature, not by regulators under some illusory emergency doctrine. Now, beyond the state constitution, there's also sort of state statutory law, and any action by the legislature or a regulatory body can be reviewed to see if there were proper procedural protections, such as a comment period. And I know that more relates to the regulators. But there's also notice provisions that the state legislature has to follow unless they declare an emergency. And one of the things under administrative law, which could come in very handy here, you can attack an action for being arbitrary and capricious. Now, given the fact that the substantive due process is in sort of a state of flux on the federal level, arbitrary and capricious actually is fairly well understood to include and this was litigated over lockdown in New York State courts. It's fairly well understood that this means, is there really a rational or scientific basis for this? Right. So those are some of the arguments that would be made. They'll be in the outline that you post on your great website. So, but the point I want to make here is we're not going to win this in court on arguing about legal principles, because as Clarence Thomas stated, that there is this police power under the Constitution. The state has police power under the Constitution. I know that's a legal jargon term. It just means they have some degree of discretion over protecting the health of the public. So even Clarence Thomas, a fairly libertarian judge, will recognize that. Now, so we're, and also under New York State law, there's no sort of magic legal bullet. So what I'm saying here, and I think this might be the big takeaway in the webinar, is that we're going to have to win this on the facts. We're going to have to do, and I know your organization has a number of volunteers, and you're studying every aspect of vaccines, the science, case studies, the records, I think the foiling documents. We're going to have to really convince a court by having not just, you have sort of a battle of the experts. We'll have maybe Paul Alexander, your colleague, put in an affidavit as Mr. Aldinger did. And then they'll have their science expert have an affidavit. And the judge didn't go to science school, or the judge is not a doctor. Maybe the judge majored in history in college before they went to law school. And there's a tendency to give the benefit of the doubt to the expert who's favoring the government position. So what I'm saying is we're really going to have to win the battle of the experts, not just, indicate that there's two points of view, but frankly that the experts that the government is inevitably going to use in these lawsuits has no scientific basis whatsoever. And in fact, I think we have to be pretty tough in going after any connections they have to big pharma. I think if you dig deep enough into a lot of these so-called medical experts, they're getting grants, some sort of subsidies. The medical schools they teach at or practice at are getting grants from big pharma. And we have to really be, I don't want to use the word ruthless, but we have to be very tough in going after their experts. We're going to have to produce, I know that there's some younger people and infants even getting these vaccines. We're going to have to find out what is happening to those cases and present actual cases to a judge and say, look, this has already been being used. There's side effects, there's hospitalizations and so on, whatever the data is going to show. So I think ultimately, any lawsuit, whether state or federal, whether you're looking at arbitrary and capricious under the New York civil practice law, or you're going into federal court arguing due process, Ninth Amendment, or whatever the legal doctrine is, I think we're just going to have to make a better factual case that because younger people have a much lower rate of mortality and morbidity, because the vaccines don't work to stop the spread, and similar arguments of that nature, that's really going to determine whether we win or lose this in the courts. So I just want to point out before we get into questions that given the track record where we've had a few successes in the lockdown here and there, but generally speaking, we haven't really been winning these cases. Now, I think there's a significant difference between cases involving COVID generally with adults, where there is evidence of harm, there is evidence of mortality and morbidity. Now we're talking about a different age cohort, and the science is completely different. But we still face a difficult task to convince judges to put a kibosh on what the executive and the legislative branch is doing when they're protesting to the courts. All we're trying to do is protect people's health. So I think that in addition to litigation, and of course I litigate for a living, we have to look at all the different options. And I talk about in the outline, which will be available, political action. For example, I identified in the outline about 10 states that are at high risk of passing this type of mandate. Now, several of these states have gubernatorial elections 2 weeks from tomorrow. And I would, not to get political here, but New York is one of those states. And one of the candidates has said, I'm against these mandates. The other candidate hasn't said anything, which I think is kind of a smoking gun. Illinois and I'm forgetting the other state. There's 3 critical states. I'll think about it in a second, where people can use political action here. And with respect to these candidates who don't want to state their position, for example, in Illinois and New York, I would have people out there, any of their public appearances, asking them that question and force them to answer that question. And perhaps some of these problems can be solved at the ballot box. And those states are listed. It's California, Connecticut. Well, what I did in the outline is I took the states that have a mandate for school employees, and I'm assuming those are at highest risk of making this a mandate for children's vaccines. That's California, Connecticut, Delaware, Hawaii, Illinois, New York. And California, Connecticut, Illinois, and New York have gubernatorial elections. So get out there and find out what the candidates are what their position is. And if they don't have a position, well, you'll have to, I'm not going to tell anybody how to vote, but you're all smart people and you'll know what to do. There's also, at the end of the day, I think that if they do pass these mandates and court action is unsuccessful, I'm a big believer in direct citizen action. It's the title of one of my books. So, to me, if I was a parent with young children, failure is not an option here.
Aim more a little bit at the mic, please. Thank you.
Yeah, I would pull my kids out of that school until such time as they get their act together and rescind that. And I know that obviously it's very difficult to pick up stakes and move to a different state, but keep in mind that, we do have a federal republic. You're free to travel and move, and hundreds of thousands of people have moved, I think, as a result of the lockdown to go to a freer state. So, that's your last bargaining chip, basically saying that, if you do this and we lose in court, I'm going to pull my kids out of these schools until cooler heads prevail. So again, I just to sum up, and we can get into questions. I think that litigation is important, but it should be part of a larger integrated strategy. I think it would be great to have during the lockdown, I've been doing my thing, other lawyers have been doing their thing. There's been some cooperation on the mass case with some of the lawyers in Albany, which I was very grateful of. But I think the lawyers, since there's such a shortage of lawyers in the whole country battling the lockdown, I think all of us need to start talking to each other, work together, share ideas. And then the experts, we did have a nice team approach on the mask lawsuit, where I kind of was allowed to use some of the experts in the Albany litigation. And that's what we need here, because there's frankly so many different aspects of the science here. It's going to take not just one expert or 5 experts, it's going to take about 10 experts. And if we had a nice team of experts that would agree to be available to all the lawyers, subject to their schedules and so on, I think that would be the best way to be prepared for anything that is to come in the future. So We'll have that outlined online, and I promised Naomi I'm going to do a sample complaint, and that'll be done in hopefully about a week or 10 days. And that's all I have, and hopefully we'll have some good questions.
Fantastic. So what I've heard you say, just to restate, is that one can take action at a federal level with a lawsuit. One can take action at a state level with a lawsuit. First, one should exhaust one's effort to get a religious or medical exemption for one's child. You've given us 4 or 5 different approaches, legal approaches, and you'll be giving us a template that we can bring to our lawyers if we want to bring those lawsuits. But you've also said 2 other really important things, which is that lawsuits should not take place in a vacuum of other strategies like citizen action. And the citizens' actions we can take are constantly demanding that our elected officials and people running for office answer and commit to what their stance is about injecting our children. And you've also said, and I think this is really, really interesting, that citizens can band together, and this is not your job to put this out, but I'm jumping on it and putting it out as my job. Citizens can band together to write a declaration or a commitment really to their local school boards and to their officials saying, we are going to move and take our kids if you go ahead with this, and that'll affect, of course, income for schools and school districts. And lastly, you've said, which I think is a brilliant idea, and we at Daily Clout can help with it, that there should be a kind of pooled expertise think tank where 10 experts can be available to lawyers who are not necessarily working together in identical lawsuits, but are working in aligned lawsuits, and they can tap the expertise of these 10 experts as their schedules allow on an ongoing basis. And I know that we can put that together, and that is really genius. And we also have the ability to convene the lawyers that you've described and gather them in one place so that they can compare notes and exchange approaches. So I know that hundreds of people are watching this, and I'm sure that they have questions, and I'm sure their questions are super specific. And also, everyone look in your chat column there. There's a handouts section, and you've got a handout that you can take with you that will be a guide to what you just heard from Mr. Ostrowski. Amy, you're so good at this. Do you want to present the questions, or maybe there's so many questions. Here we are. So many questions, my goodness.
Would you like to do it, or do you want me to?
So Thomas says, CDC recommendation gives schools a green light to force these jabs. He's wrong. What would you say to that, Mr. Ostrowski? Do they have a green light to force these jabs? I think it's just a recommendation at this point rather than a mandate, correct? Or what's your opinion?
It is something to be extremely concerned about, and it's a major problem. But it's not self-executing, at least under New York law. See, I can only speak to New York law, but this,
right.
We've said in the prior seminars, states are kind of similar in the way they're structured.
Right.
They might not have exactly the same laws, but I'm assuming that in most states there's a statute that lists the mandated vaccines. In New York, those are stated, the regulations repeat them, and as far as I know, this is not self-executing.
Right, and in fact,
up by legislation.
In fact, Michelle says the New York State Legislature already has a proposed bill to tie the CDC guidance to state aid and student enrollment. So that's how they're driving that through. And Leah points out, which is correct, Governor DeSantis has already rejected this for Florida. And a number of states, and Daily Clout has a summary of this, a number of governors have said they are not going to do it. So that is definitely a train to get on in your own state. So Thomas says he's been told that in his state, Ohio, parents may be able to opt out of their kid getting the injection. And then Laura says that she's also in Ohio, and she says, how do we get the template that you just mentioned? Mr. Ostrowski, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, the template will be on the Daily Clout site. Now, in the outline, there's a list of states that will not mandate COVID-19 vaccines. I list Ohio on there. I can't guarantee I caught every state, but there's about 15 of them in the outline. So you can't, you always have to be cautious on this, but I think in those states, there's less of a concern. The states where the concern is the states that are very well known to have had a very strict lockdown policy, such Michigan is the other gubernatorial race, which is now close. So in Michigan, Illinois, New York, there's a close governor's race, surprisingly, in those states. And one candidate has committed against the vaccines, and the other candidate has not stated it, which I think speaks volumes. But I think Ohio should be good, but you're going to have to confirm that through your own research. And yes,
jumping in, Mr. Ostrowski, Ohio, Jeff Neff at the Ohio State House, this is Thomas, sent me the following. Ohio's required immunizations for school attendance are listed in statute in section 3313.671 of the revised code, and the link is right there, and does not include COVID-19. This section also includes an opt-out for reasons of conscience, including religious convictions. Thus, the current law would have to be changed in order for a COVID-19 vaccination to become required for a child to attend school. So everybody in Ohio, you need to know this, and everybody not in Ohio, this is a great model of a statute that we can share. We've had a lot of success offering model bills, model regulations that you can ask your state to adopt. And Mike says, EUA offers informed consent if there are potential harms, and these are not informed to the injected. And this is to you, Mr. Ostrowski. Does that not violate the Bill of Rights, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness? What about informed consent here?
That is considered. I mean, I agree that it does. So informed consent is generally speaking something that your doctor has to provide to your medical provider has to provide to you. This is a little different because if it's compulsory, it's compulsory, and I think that in the process of making it compulsory, which I'm certainly against, informed consent somewhat goes out the window. So that's an important principle, but it's largely a principle of sort of your relationship between you and your doctor, not between you and the state.
Sarah has a great question, which I wanted to ask too. What about the fact that, as has recently been all over the news, which we've been telling you for a year and a half, but whatever, how about the fact that it does not stop transmission? What would the rationale be to make children take it? That's a great question. Well,
I think if I was arguing the state's position, well, they could still get sick. But if you look at the ratio of illness in young people compared to the ratio of hospitalizations and illness from the vaccine, it works out very badly for that argument. And that's something that our panel of experts, I think, who have already been studying this and writing about it, as you know, will be able to put that data together to convince a judge that they have no factual basis for that argument.
Here's a great question. Jim asks, what's the difference between a recommendation versus a requirement in CDC land? Will New York State school boards be able to claim requirement?
No, it is a recommendation, and it's something that I think the commentators today indicated it's going to make it, they're going to use this as an excuse to do it and take the heat off themselves. But it's interesting that several of these governors who are also running for re-election do not want to say what their position is. So I think they know that this is a political landmine, but we have to pin these people down before voting.
Right. KB asks a great question. Can we sue the schools? And one of the things that really excited me about your last couple of webinars is you did give people templates to go after people both civilly and criminally as individuals. Can you apply that logic here as well? And can we sue the schools?
Yeah, you can sue. I think primarily the defendants would be the health department, the governor, and perhaps the legislature. But there's no reason why if it's the schools who are executing this policy, you may want to consider adding them as defendants as well.
And could we recycle the templates that you gave us before, where we could bring civil and criminal charges against individuals in this case? I mean, people were very fired up last time about the ability to bring civil and criminal charges against school principals, teachers, school board members, Board of Health members, all the way up to the governor. Can you talk about that, please, for those who weren't here for those sessions?
Yes, if there's a constitutional violation, any state official carrying out that violation is personally liable, and they're personally liable for money damages, injunctive relief, punitive damages. And as we talked about in the use of the criminal law webinar, any constitutional violation is actually a crime. And we talked about that people can file criminal complaints. It would be a federal case, so you'd want to go to the FBI or the U.S. attorney. And also we talked about reviving grand juries. I think grand juries, we're having a program on that tomorrow night in Lockport, New York. Grand juries have to wake up and be a lot more aggressive in understanding that their job is to investigate government corruption. And they have to get out from under being sort of lapdogs for the prosecutor and being intimidated by the almighty judge with the black robe. The judge does not control grand juries, except in rare cases. And the prosecutor is not your boss either. So people who get on grand juries, we can't talk to people on grand juries, but if citizens in the near future, get on a grand jury, they need to realize that their job, that the founding fathers wanted them to do, is ferret out corruption. And if it's a criminal matter, they can actually recommend an indictment to the U.S. attorney. So there are these mechanisms out there, and in desperate times like these, we have to dust off these tools that haven't been used in quite some time and use them as they were intended to check.
Well, how would sorry to interrupt, Mr. Ostrowski, how would the people, well, two things very concretely, and like drill down please to the level of like, I'm sitting here in my living room, tell me what to do. Because like literally my husband and I are having this conversation. We've got an 11-year-old, I have an 11-year-old stepson. How do I tell the FBI that my stepson's school is about to commit a crime against him? And how do I do it without exposing myself to being arrested for harassing the police or whatever, A? Yep. And B, how do we convene a grand jury?
Well, we can't convene the grand jury. They're convened by the court, allegedly using a random list. And I think it probably is random. What we have to do is we don't educate people on being trial jurors or grand jurors. Grand jurors investigate and indict, and then you have a smaller trial jury. We need to have civic education, and it's not being done by the schools. We need to do it like we're talking about tomorrow night, having grand jury associations.
Right.
We need to tell people in advance what their rights and powers and duties are, because once they get on the grand jury, the judges and prosecutors aren't really telling them. They don't.
Right.
Apparently don't want them to know as much as I want them to know.
Well, let's go back. I'm going to pivot you. Sorry to be so directive and bossy.
No
I think a lot of people on this call think it's such an emergency and it's so time sensitive that we can definitely add better civic education for the future, but urgently. Dave said threaten legal action if they do not cease and desist any attempts to put on school schedule. What are some immediate, like next week, things that people can do? And your last webinars were very helpful about this, to put like schools on notice, right? And other clients we have at Daily Cloud have also asked us for other issues to put hospitals on notice to not use remdesivir, to put universities on notice not to mandate injections for college-age students. So what letters could people write? What filing should they make? You mentioned going to the sheriff last time. What can people do right now to at least maybe not win in court yet, but at least tell the FBI, tell the sheriff, tell the school board, we are watching you, you can't move ahead. What can they do?
Well, one thing you should not do is don't make any threats, because that could be misconstrued. And what we did in the template originally was we had a request to investigate, and I think that's the safe way to ask the FBI or any government agency. Say, look, I think we're assuming that this legislation is passed or a regulation is passed. And now we have this mandate that arguably is unconstitutional, is arguably civilly and criminally wrong. We had the template that's still on the website. Perhaps we could put it on listed under this webinar as well, where there's a request to investigate whether such behavior violates the criminal law, and that is a safe way to file something. In my view, again, if you look at the outline, I'm not giving legal advice. I'm just giving my opinion as a citizen lawyer. That's a way to immunize you from sort of counter harassment, like, oh, it's a defamation, or you've made a false criminal charge. If you ask for an investigation, I think that's a safe way to do that. Now, putting people on notice, I think that a simple letter indicating to the school district or to the governor or to your legislator or to the Department of Health stating, we hear that you may be considering doing this, and we believe that this is illegal under the Constitution. And in fact, it might actually be a criminal. I'd like you to think long and hard before doing that. Something of that nature. I think you have a right under the First Amendment, the right to petition the government. I think that's covered within that right. But don't make threats and don't make accusations unless you have solid factual proof. But you can express concerns, you can express opinions, and you can ask for investigations. And I think that keeps you safe from the retaliation that we know these types of people will engage in if you give them that opportunity.
So jumping right in there, I'm going to reach out to you after this webinar in the week ahead and ask to engage you to write some template letters that people can use so that they are just getting it just right. Jennifer says, Dr. Wolf, also important in California, depending on the kind of legal action filed, a litigant must file an administrative complaint first against the school district in order to, quote, exhaust the administrative remedy before suing. So everyone in California, pay attention. And David asks, will you please speak to the removal of elected officials, Mr. Ostrowski?
Well, in New York State, we don't have that, but you have to look at the state laws. There is petition and removal in, I think, about half of the states. So that's certainly a possibility that I hadn't thought of for the seminar, because unfortunately I live in the great state of New York where we can't do that. But that is a great idea, actually.
And Sandy asks, if a community, there's so many good ideas, if a community decides to remove students from school for protection, can that state go against a homeschooling option? That is a great question. Is the state going to drag these kids out of their homes and say, you're neglecting the kids, you're neglecting their education? What's your thought?
Well, you'll want to look at your own state regulations. I know New York is considered somewhat restrictive on homeschooling, but some of the great homeschoolers in this area have seminars, which I've attended several of them. And if you study the regulations and listen to people who are knowledgeable, you can comply with these regulations. It's not as hard as it's made to look. So even in New York, homeschooling is becoming widespread and much more popular. But keep in mind, most of the states make it easier than New York. So yes, homeschooling is an option. Just do some basic research and find out what you have to do to comply with the law, so you don't have the truant officer coming after you. But I know a lot of homeschoolers, they have no problems in this area at all.
Amy, that is a note for us. We will put resources for homeschoolers on our site. Cassandra says, so important. Here's a site that shows laws by state, and the link is right there. It's from nvic.org. And Dave points out, which is true, that ICANN and Children's Health Defense are both going to take legal action on any state that attempts to do it. Valerie says, we live in Massachusetts. We are the only family we know who refused to take the jab. Worried about what this will mean for our children's schooling. What is the difference for private versus public schools in terms of mandates? Mr. Ostrowski, do you have thoughts?
Yeah, just using New York as a model. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of protection because I believe that private schools are subject to the same regulations, and the only way to if all other options are exhausted, only homeschooling or frankly moving to a state without these mandates, those are the only options you have, unfortunately.
Sarah points out, and I'm not sure what state she's in, now that it is on the schedule, you have to prove, quote, willful intent to harm, which is different from fraud. But this raises a good question. You know that we are working hard and we have our lawyers working to prove that Pfizer committed fraud, for instance. Is fraud a way to protect your children legally, or claiming that this was fraudulent?
I think it's somewhat of an indirect route. I do believe that we talked about fraud in the prior webinar, and I think there's been rampant fraud here. And if that's proven, I think that ultimately, maybe indirectly, that would ultimately vacate the mandate.
Okay.
Yes, I think that's true. I think it's a good thought.
Yes, go ahead, Amy.
I was going to jump in with, I thought this was an interesting question. It says, is it possible to get this removed from the CDC's children's schedule in the future, or is it like once it's on there, it stays on there?
Yeah, I think there is in theory, there's a way to sue the CDC. I didn't see too many people doing that. And as I said in the outline, I don't think we got into that. Because you have to have standing, if you tried to sue the CDC, some judge is probably going to throw it out and say, well, you're not even affected by this.
Right.
So, but if some lawyer with a better thought about that than I comes along and decides to sue the CDC, I would be all for it and would help in any way I can.
So this is really important. Sherry Lorenz says, according to NASHP, 20 states have banned COVID vaccines from being included in school mandates as of October 3rd. So that is a Daily Clout superpower. Will track down these 20 states, will show the regulations, the model bills, and you can take it from there. And let's see, is there any way for a citizen to go to each place giving the shots, provide them notice of informed consent and the research, and let them know that if they do not educate each person they administer it to of the risks, they are legally compromised? I do not believe that that is useful, but I'm not a lawyer. What's your view?
It's yeah, sounds like a lot of energy, not really focused on the main point. I think that information should go to the higher decision makers, including governors, legislators, the health department, and certainly judges who get assigned any lawsuits about this issue.
Right. And chiming in there, often if you write such a letter, it just goes into the black hole. But we at Daily Clout will publish your letter to your representative and call them to follow up so that they know that people are watching. Thomas asks, and you're the expert on this, Mr. Ostrowski, can individual school board members be sued for mandating the jab?
Well, I think you could sue them if they're the ones carrying out sort of enforcing these laws. Their lawyers are going to say, I'm just doing my job. Whether that's a defense under 1983, generally speaking, the courts say that just because you are following orders doesn't mean that you're not liable if the order you're following is unconstitutional. That said, it's a bit of a gray area, murky. We tend to but we tend to sue people who are on the chain of command, just so that if the judge rules in our favor, everybody can be ordered to do the right thing by the court, and they're before the court.
Right.
I know that's a lot of legalese, but sorry.
Lisa asks, can you sue private schools for this? And it looks like I'm missing some questions, so I'm going to invite Amy to join in after you answer that, please.
I think the private schools would be the least sort of responsible for this, and they probably literally are just, doing what they're told to do. So I don't think that would be my first target.
Okay. Amy, what have I missed?
is one that says, I thought this was interesting. If I am correct, HPV Gardasil is on the CDC recommended child vaccine schedule for adolescents right now. And I do believe that's right. So could this be used as a precedent for forced vaccination? I understand the underlying intent with COVID-19 vaccinations, but I declined this, I think, meaning HPV and others for my sons. How is the COVID-19 one different than HPV?
Well, I hope it's the same because that the HPV is not mandated. As far as I know, it's not mandated in New York. We've had these conversations with doctors. They always try to get you to they don't ask you about the ones that are mandated. They just give them, basically. So hopefully the COVID vaccine will be something that's on this CDC list, but not mandated.
Okay.
Nick, oh, sorry. Is there more you want to ask, Amy?
There's some different ones that are flagged, but you can go ahead if you would like to.
No, go ahead if you
I can't recall if this one has already been asked. Can't attorneys invoke a grand jury?
I wish I could. The grand jury is organized and set up by the court based on a random list. Unfortunately, the rest of it is this big, well-kept secret. And although secrecy does have its place to protect the operations of the grand jury, unfortunately, the public is clueless about these things. And one of the big problems, not to get off on a tangent, is how to contact the grand jury, because if you contact them, you might be violating federal law. So we're going to talk about this tomorrow night. Once you're on a grand jury, it'd be great to tell the judge, hey, we'd like to let it be known that to citizens that they can contact us. Mm-hmm. That would be a revolutionary change in the law, frankly.
Oh, okay.
Right.
One, I've been kind of reading the chat for questions, so if I repeat anything that's already been asked, just let me know. It says, can we also sue school board members individually?
We did ask that. There's going to be a template from Mr. Ostrowski, and it'll be there. Okay. Well, you've created it already, so we can repost it by tomorrow. Okay. I love this one. This isn't a question, but an observation. It's true. Doug says, it appears everyone is passing the buck, CDC to state, state to state health board to town, town to school board to local health department, who points back to CDC. Where in that can attorneys make money like a car accident? Otherwise, more won't get involved. It's kind of a frank way to put it, but Mr. Ostrowski, what's your response? I think Doug is absolutely right. They've created this circular system. And how do we incentivize attorneys to take this on? There are so few.
Well, you can get attorney's fees, but I can tell you from experience, it's like, 5 years from now, and you got to pay bills in the meantime. So there's not a lot of money to be made in this area. Police misconduct verdicts occasionally can be lucrative, but this just has to be done by people, lawyers who are public interest lawyers. We're not going to get rich on it, and there's few of us, but that's why I say we have to work together. It's very difficult. The problem is, it's sort of an underlying theme here. Our opposition is well funded and organized. And we're not well funded and we're not well organized. So we at least need to get well organized and raise a little bit of money for expert witnesses. So I think a lot of the expert witnesses, and I know this in the lockdown, have done it for free, never sent me a bill. But some of these people obviously need to be paid and they have their own expenses. So we need to work together. Lawyers, unfortunately, have not risen to the occasion. I contacted one of the bar associations in my area. I said, can you please have some lawyers help out? I get calls constantly and I can't answer them all. And the fellow never got back to me. I'm very disappointed. But we just have to do the best we can and work as a team. And hopefully the tide is shifting in our direction. I think it is shifting in our direction as time goes on.
Well, let's be proactive. It sounds like you're saying, well, you're going to create these templates, right? And people are looking for the existing templates on Daily Clout and not locating them. So that's a Kate question, and she'll check tomorrow, everyone. We'll repost the templates right on the homepage of Daily Clout. We'll send them. We'll also post them on my Getter feed. We will make them unmissable. But in addition, someone asks, can we get a draft of a way, Carmela, to request an investigation? If we were to engage you and to task our friends who are the expert witnesses and find a way to pay everybody, theoretically, would you draft all of the tools that people need in order to go to to bring these lawsuits and to send these notices of you're cautioned, and to get a draft of a way to request an investigation, like the whole suite of tools, basically? I know we have 2 or 3 good templates already.
Yes, some of this work has been done, and I could certainly take those forms and tailor them to this particular issue. It wouldn't break my back too much, frankly.
Okay, well, we'll engage you for that. And we'll also tap the good doctors to be available to you and your colleagues, and we'll find a way to make that possible for them as well. And can Carmela also get a draft of a way to request an investigation? Can you add that to request a grand jury investigation?
Yeah, that one's going to be a little tricky because I'm actually researching that now, and it may be illegal to contact a grand jury. It's just crazy. We need to figure out a way to revive the grand jury. I'm working on that now.
Okay, thank you. Andrew points out, in California, you must send a Tort Claims Act notice to the school district before suing for a tort, a wrong. Are you familiar with that?
Yes, that's also true in New York State. That's something I think our template discussed. If not, we'll put it in any new materials. That, however, does not apply to federal constitutional claims. You do not have to file such notices of claim. You can go directly to federal court.
Excellent. Resource Dave says a Celis homeschool program, and we are not affiliates, is good, offers scholarships too, and that is $80 a month. A lot of people are saying, how am I going to homeschool teenagers? And Melissa says it's much easier now than years ago. Check out the Homeschool Legal Defense Fund, and they can give you lots of info and contacts for state and local homeschool organizations. The vaccine courts are corrupt and throughout most cases. Do you think getting as many people as possible to file an adverse events report might overwhelm the system and force reform in these corrupt courts, asks Suzanne.
Those are 2 separate agencies, but I think the more the merrier. The more claims filed and the more notices to the VAERS system. It can't possibly, information is good. So I would recommend it.
I'm going to end with a question that actually has a positive answer I can give. Leah asks, I'm tired of the endless Pfizer commercials in Ohio happily promoting the jab. Is there any type of cease and desist for local media? And I know that George Smith, our volunteer lawyer at Daily Clout, has moved ahead with his lawsuit. And I think it's actually Ohio that he's got plaintiffs. Yeah, Western Ohio. And the way they're approaching that is false advertising. So they're going after those ads specifically. Oh, wow. Yeah. And Cassandra, I'm just going to add this, posted a link. It can be used against school boards and more, bondsforthewin.com. Honestly, I've heard mixed things about that. I don't know enough about it. I know some people are excited about that. And lastly, okay, Thomas says, are these mandates a violation of the Nuremberg Code, Mr. Ostrowski?
Well, I think they are, and I've written about that in the past, and I think we talked about that at the criminal seminar. I think they are. And
that means they're illegal, ultimately, right?
Well, it's difficult to figure out how to prosecute these things because there's an international criminal court, but the United States is, to the best of my knowledge, not subjected themselves to that jurisdiction.
Right. All right. Well, we have daunting tasks ahead of us, but Mr. Ostrowski has given us a range of tools, more of them being drafted by him. We're going to underwrite that and provide it to you on the homepage of Daily Clout, in addition to the existing templates that he's very kindly going to update for this current situation, or to make specific to this current situation. You've got your work cut out. We all do as citizens to press our elected officials. We can also create mass actions such as petitions, letters to school districts, which we at Daily Clout will publish, threatening to withdraw all of our kids unless they back off. And we can use the templates that he's already created to bring legal lawsuits and file criminal charges against officials already.
And I did post links to the existing templates in the chat, but we will repost that just if anyone wants to look quickly.
All right. That is a very fact-filled hour. I'm very honored to be with all of you. Hundreds of people have joined us. Hundreds more, if not thousands, will watch this. Mr. Ostrowski, you've been a light in the darkness. You've given us some, very concrete tools to work with. We'll make sure to get all of them in the hands of everyone, the ones that exist and the ones that you'll create specifically for this occasion. And Amy, do you want to wrap up? Mr. Ostrowski, is there anything else you want to say? And then we'll turn it over to Amy to close out.
Thanks for having me. The legal notice, this does not constitute legal advice. It's on the outline. A lot of the ideas are in the outline, and I'll produce more paperwork that we talked about so people know exactly what to do. Thank you very much.
We're so grateful to you, Mr. Ostrowski. And Amy, do you want to say goodnight to everyone?
Thank you, everyone, for attending. We really appreciate the great turnout, and it's been so informative tonight. And if you enjoyed this, please think about going to dailyclout.io/donate. And if you're able to donate, that's how we are able to hold things like this and provide these resources. So thank you so much, everyone, for coming to visit us tonight.
And there will be more. Thank you all. We're going to sign off now. And thank you, Getter and War Room, for streaming and supporting and showcasing all of these. And we'll also be sending the templates to Getter and to War Room to distribute. Thank you all. Big fight ahead, but it's our kids. It's worth it. Take care, everybody.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Good night.
Good night. Hey, everyone. It's Naomi Wolf of Daily Clout, and I am asking you to please, if you like the video you just saw, support us, become a member, donate. You can send checks to P.O. Box 24, Millerton, New York, 12546, or go to Daily Clout, DAILYCLOUT, become a member or donate. Thank you so much for your support. Every penny goes for paying our hardworking staff, paying hosting costs, and paying our lawyers who have been leading the fight to keep you safe and free, to keep the Constitution safe and to keep you free. Thank you so much.